was thinking to myself over the weekend that it's been a while since we've thanked our intrepid producer, Jacob. So we should probably, and I don't know if
we still have one of those.
Yeah, I know.
You mean there's not just some magic fairy production that takes place like Cobblers? Like there's a production elf?
I think Mike Lavoie would appreciate being called our production fairy or production elf. What do you think?
Well, maybe if you knew his stature, the joke is real.
Oh, ouch. Jeez.
Somewhere Mike Lavoie is having a good laugh with us. I mean, we're laughing at him, but he's laughing with us.
Welcome to the Voyage podcast, a show that traverses the oceans of myth and legend through the lens of Catholic theology and philosophy. Come aboard as we set sail in pursuit of the heroic life and Christian virtue, with your hosts, Mike Schramm and Jacob Platty.
So thanks for joining us. Thank you, everybody, for coming to listen to this next episode of the Voyage podcast. So we're going to be talking about myth, memory, and ancient wisdom. Now, originally, this was not just going to be the two of us. Do you remember we've actually recorded this once, which I know that sounds like we say that too often.
How could I forget?
Yeah, how could you forget? Very nice.
You got to quit telling the audience how much we have to re-record things.
So no,
we are professionals.
So how could you forget? So this was actually one of the very early ones we recorded, and it was actually, we had a guest on, and so we had Dr. Kevin Vost, who specialized in memory, especially. He wrote a number of books on just the nature of memory, the art of memory, and I say art purposefully because it was very much what can we as humans do to not so much like build it up as if it was like synthetic or artificial thing, but that it's a part of our human nature to remember. And so it's like we're tapping into something that's already there. And so these skills, or developing the house of memory is what he called it. And he wrote a number of books on it. Devout Catholic who used a lot of it to remember different things about the faith, whether it was the sacraments, the books of the Bible, the ecumenical councils. You could use it for anything. And
yeah, it's a great thing. And he learned it from the ancients.
Yeah, right. And so we're going to get into that too very much. That this was something that actually predates Christianity, but most things was perfected by not just Christianity, but St. Thomas Aquinas. And so a lot of what Dr. Vost did as well was how to incorporate the works of St. Thomas Aquinas, or the thought of St. Thomas Aquinas, with this ancient art of memory.
Well, I feel like we're jumping the gun here a little bit. Yeah. I assume you wanted to, towards the front of this, give the bad news or give
as I mentioned,
dedication.
Originally it was an interview / conversation with Dr. Vost, and it was because of the sound quality was so poor, and admittedly this was very early in our just hosting / interviewing kind of duties, you could say, that we wanted to re-record it. And it was always something that was kind of got pushed to the back burner. And then it was the week after, well, it would have been your Holy Week, Orthodox Holy Week, but the week of Easter for the Catholic Church, I just stumbled across online his obituary that it had announced that he had very unexpectedly, and this was a shock to everybody. I mean,
because he wasn't particularly old. I mean, wasn't he in his 60s?
He was 62 maybe? Is what it said. And not only that, and we didn't really get into this very much in our conversation, but he was actually a health guy too. But
well, and it's just this episode goes out to Dr. Vost, one of our early supporters and a real stand-up guy, stand-up Christian. And it's too bad we won't ever have that conversation with him like in public the way that we intended, but hopefully he's listening to it somewhere.
Well, and not that we're particularly special in this regard, but he genuinely enjoyed, getting to talk with us, even though he's probably given that talk on memory 1,000 times, if not more.
He was great. It was funny because it was the first time that we were trying to incorporate a third voice. Well, I mean, give or take the episode 0 stuff where we're talking about the corporate
the introduction
things
with
like that. Yeah. But it was the first time we had like a stranger basically, or a guest, and trying to incorporate him into what this looks like. And I would say that it was an interesting, just to give a little bit of like behind the curtain, behind the scenes
It
stuff.
was a rough draft on our
Um,
part.
It was a rough draft on our part because frankly, I think he was too nice of a guy. Like he was just so nice. And, you know, I kind of have fun like throwing barbs and things like that.
Well,
And early
we're
on, it
so
was like,
comfortable with each
he's,
other that we will at
yeah,
each
right.
other.
Yeah, we can. And, you bring a third person into the conversation, two friends, and you bring a third person who's just an acquaintance. And, I quickly realized I needed to adapt. I needed to
Yeah.
adapt what I was doing with you to like make him more comfortable because I feel like what I was picking up vibing from him was like, wow, this Jacob guy's a jerk.
See, and
I don't think he felt like I was a jerk. I think that he was just unsure how to engage with the, kind of like tit for tat that we were giving each other and stuff.
yeah,
And
yeah.
he was just sitting nicely in the corner while we like
We
were being petty with each other.
we didn't warn him of our brand. Is that the language?
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's actually, because maybe I was jumping ahead a little bit. So Dr. Vost, it wasn't a memory technique that you could say he developed it, but it wasn't something that he invented by any means. This is something that not only does it go back to St. Thomas Aquinas, but it even goes back to the ancients, even before, the pagans before the time of Christ. But it was something that, the educated Christians would always use. They would always tap into this because of how effective it was. And I know that I think, and this even came up in our conversation with Dr. Vost, but Cicero was one of those early proponents of, like I said, an educated statesman who incorporated the art of memory in his work. But also, it wasn't just meant to be a utilitarian thing. This was actually how you formed a person. And I know that was one of the big significant things, is that this was about forming the soul. And that memory has an essential relationship to the soul. Or you could say the soul has an essential relationship to memory. But how to form that memory better, you're going to form your soul better. Go ahead. Sorry.
It's funny. It's funny. There's like a correlation here because, evidently back when writing as such was being introduced to cultures that were, oral cultures, right? There's always like kind of pushback against it because it's like, this is going to lessen our people. Because if you can just write stuff down, instead of grooming your people to have the wherewithal to just remember things, you are giving them this crutch that's going to weaken them, right, as a person.
There's that
so
story
this is very personal.
In the Republic, I think that Plato writes down, or Socrates shares in the Republic, of that very thing you're describing. But go ahead.
That's probably where I'm getting it. Frankly,
Yeah.
no, I'm glad you introduced that because I can't remember exactly where I'd gotten that from, but it was probably Plato then.
Probably,
and it's an interesting point. Everything
it's
comes
just
from Plato.
Offhanded.
Anyway.
You could almost say
I'm just going to start ascribing things to Plato.
You could almost say all philosophy is a footnote to Plato, as some may have said.
Did you come up with that? You come up with that?
I mean,
that's good.
Plato
that's
came
a
up
good
with
line.
it. He probably said it in anticipation.
Plato said that everything was a footnote to himself.
Calling his shot, basically. Just straight up.
And I mean, who can deny him? Who can deny him, right? I'm just going to start ascribing everything to Plato. And it's like, just do it. Plato said that.
Plato. I mean, how could he have not have said that at some
point? As
point?
the great philosopher, just do it.
Well, it's funny anyway, sorry. It's funny you say that because, so that obviously is the slogan for Nike, and Nike is the Greek goddess of victory, which is going to tie us into our origins of this sort of memory method. But I don't want to cut you off. Go ahead and finish your, I don't know, meandering story.
Ramble?
Sure.
Finish my ramble. You got to stop and smell the roses, Mike. So this is
also
just
something Plato said. I think.
Rose smelling. Yeah, also attributed to Plato.
It's funny.
I don't even remember where I was going.
We're like joking so much about this, and I actually, one of my future episode ideas was I want to title it "Your Mom is a Footnote to Plato." Like, because it's basically like every philosophical idea somebody, will, and again, that it's because of that saying, all philosophy is a footnote to Plato. And so that was kind of my, I don't know, snarky repartee or whatever. But
No, that's hilarious. I
um,
dig it. We should do that sometime.
yeah.
I don't remember where I was going. It was going to be awesome. It was going to
Well,
be
let me
great.
ask you. Let me
And all
ask you
your
this.
constant interjections, they just ruined
Mhm.
it. So
I know, just like
Yeah.
every other conversation we have, Jacob's going to come up with something great, but then my need for attention
then I
gets
get
too great,
derailed.
and
Yeah.
so let's actually go through some of the, so I wanted to, because we started talking about this, it was actually, again,
Oh,
not that
I do
everything
remember
is-
where I was going to go.
Oh, look
Wait,
at that.
Okay, no, I remember where I was going to go now. It's interesting. There's an interesting relationship to our modern era, though, right? Because we all assume that reading and writing is the bee's knees. Because
Uh-huh.
it is, right? I mean, as much as those people complained about it's lessening us as people, they were probably right about that. But it was kind of like a worthwhile sacrifice to the
They were the
societal
old
good,
men yelling
let's
at
say.
clouds when they complained about
They
the
were of
technology
their
of
day,
writing.
and you always
Yeah.
need those. They're almost always right. I don't care who you're talking about, and I don't care what era you're talking about. Give or take slavery, because slavery is usually pretty bad, no matter what the
boy.
context is. But anyway, what we are dealing with now is a memory problem. Because you've heard this said a million times from a million different sources. We all have the memory of a goldfish. Our technology has adapted us quite literally to no longer be able to retain information very well. Because the way we engage with computer screens or phones or any number like advertising, like the way we communicate,
Mhm.
the books we write, the stories we tell are all driven by a basically commercial interest to be for brevity, right? Now I know
Yeah.
brevity is a virtue in and of itself,
The soul of
but
wit.
I don't think that that's and there's a good
That wasn't Plato.
that's
That was
good, right?
Shakespeare. That wasn't Plato. That was
No,
Shakespeare.
well, Shakespeare stole it from Plato.
Probably.
But probably. Um, you know, and it's funny. So even Shakespeare says brevity is the soul of wit, but no one's going to accuse Shakespeare of being, short-winded, right?
Mhm.
But even in his, it's because we evolve over time, and what was a short and to the point of yesteryear is now 300 words too many
It's
for
just
us, right?
it's how
'Cause
our
we
language
live
is
off of
slowly
tweets.
working towards singularity, I think is how you describe it. Language itself
Well,
is
it's
working
ironic
towards the
because in
singularity.
this is literally called out in 1984 because part of the Newspeak paradigm. Newspeak, is the phrase they have where they're condensing language. They're removing basically all extraneous, superfluous.
Superfluous, I think
I
is
just
what
made that
you're
up.
yeah.
Extraneous or superfluous.
It's all good.
But why not
yeah.
just have both? Newspeak. It's Newspeak. It's extrafluous.
So your
But
your description is superfluous right now, Michael. and it's because it's so
but hopefully
extemporaneous.
still witty.
That's yeah.
No, extraneous, not
No, I
extemporaneous.
know, but I'm saying you're speaking off the top of your head. It's extemporaneous, and that's why it's so superfluous because you just keep going on and on. But
Okay.
anyway, you were talking about how important brevity was, I think.
Wait, yeah. So, but we are experiencing the same problem that our ancient ancestors were ascribing to the adoption of writing. Only now it's been taken to the nth degree. And if you consider the idea of the transmission of culture to be of value, right? To be important in any way, you kind of need a population that doesn't have unnecessarily hard times just simply reading what people used to say.
Or remembering what
But
they've
we
read,
have
and that's where the memory comes in.
Well, and
too.
that's the
Like
whole
remembering
point.
the
The whole point of
story.
writing. The whole point of writing was to save us the trouble or make it much, much easier to transmit stories, transmit, ideas and things like that, right?
Yeah.
Though there is an interesting counterpoint to that where it's as soon as things get set in stone, they actually diminish. That's probably a conversation for a different time, but it's an interesting line of thought because
Well, I think it actually
basically
kind of
it's not
fits
that
in. it ties in with our faith
It does
traditions
kinda.
because we're very much about not just the written, the dead letter, but the living voice. And that's what the
Mhm.
tradition, or from a specifically Catholic perspective, the magisterium is meant to be, is the living voice that isn't in place of the dead letter, right? Because, even though it keeps getting translated every generation, every year, the Bible was still originally written, 2,000 years ago. Um,
Right.
but so you need both of those hand in hand, right? Those are the two stools of church authority. Is the three legs of the stool? Excuse me, three legs, which is the Bible, tradition, and then the magisterium. And so, like, it's that living voice alongside the letter. And that's kind of what you were saying is, as soon as it becomes a letter, it risks being just a dead letter. And so it needs that living voice alongside it. And that's where memory comes in.
Well, I'm gonna be a polite guest in this Catholic household and
Yeah, yeah.
not give too many thoughts on the magisterium. But, largely,
It
to your
wasn't
point
for you
about
anyway, so.
it wasn't, it really wasn't. I
Yeah.
just sat here politely and listened while you, gave that out. But, no, but the idea is that, yeah, once things and what I was specifically about to say was that once something gets set in stone, it is actually just one person's interpretation of that story, right? And
Okay.
it might not be the best or the most holistic, or it's the one that kind of survives, right? Now, that's just something we live with. I don't lose sleep over this, but that's the argument that I've heard made, is that
Mm.
oral traditions actually do have a certain level of superiority, because to what you were saying, they do allow for a little bit more growth or a little bit more nuance and things like that over time. But anyway, what happens nowadays is we no longer have the ability to engage with the past. So whatever value writing gave us, it's actually being nullified in real time, because yeah, okay, there's libraries. There's a whole internet of literature, of the greatest books of all time, of the great wisdom traditions of any area of the world you want to look at. But if no
Mhm.
one reads it, then it doesn't matter, right? And
Yeah.
so as a parent, I try to get my kids to engage with older stuff, because I love that maxim by C.S. Lewis. It comes from his introduction to Saint Athanasius, actually. But it's this really brilliant line. It's in like the last paragraph of his introduction, where he's like, "We read old books because it gives us a perspective that's not our current age's perspective, and there's value
Yeah.
in that." And then he finishes with, "We would read books from the future as well and get just as much value from those. They're just much harder to come by,"
Hmm.
which is just a funny little joke he
Well,
makes.
and
But
yeah,
oh,
he never did
no,
write
go
that
on, buddy.
time travel book.
No, it's true.
No. No,
It
I,
was,
I was just
yeah.
telling my kids the other week, this weekend, about he and J.R.R. Tolkien had this deal that he was going to write a space travel book, and then Tolkien was going to write a time travel book, and Lewis held up his end of the bargain. He wrote the space
I
travel. He wrote
know.
the space trilogy, but we never got that time travel book from Tolkien. But
One of these days, we're going to have time travel conversations or something like that, and we're going to have to raise the question of what Tolkien's time travel story would have looked like.
see, and
Because I think it's a conversation unto itself. It's
I
like,
think that he
what type
just
of a time travel story does he write?
see, and I think just when you get to know his style so well from obviously The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, and the Silmarillion, it just doesn't seem like it lends itself well to a time travel, but maybe I'm not giving Tolkien enough credit, so I don't know.
It would be curious.
Yeah.
But so anyway, we're supposed to read old stuff because the transmission, it is our memory. It's our social memory. The written word, we have replaced. We made a bargain with ourselves as a human species that we were going to replace oral transition communication with writing, right? And that
Mhm.
worked for thousands of years relatively well. But now look at us, right? And what do we do now? So it's actually like we need to return to being able to remember things and communicate things in a way that our children can receive, because I'm losing the battle to get my kids to read, Charles Dickens, right?
Mm.
Um, let alone my grandkids, right? So how do we retain culture?
Yeah.
And so that's
or
kind of, I
even,
think, the heart of this
and
conversation.
and yeah, in one sense, it doesn't have to be entirely a lament. Like we both said, like or well, maybe you more than me, but like we're not the old man yelling at the cloud. It's more like, how do we see a way through? And that's actually the big part of this conversation, is that it's called myth, memory, and the preservation of culture, but the transmission of culture. And because that's what the myths and memory itself was meant to do. Like it did have a purpose other than just, it helps me feel good as a human that I can remember stuff. It was very much
Hmm.
like you said, it was how this culture survived as a culture. And it doesn't just mean that the humans like that the humans had babies and then they had babies and they had babies. It was who we are as a people, and it was very much
Yep.
contextualized by the stories that those people told. And the way that they made sure they were the same people is by telling the same story. Now, not exactly the same in every single detail, but that they would transmit the bones of the story, you could say, from generation to generation. And so that's
Well,
where,
and
like I
this is
said, the
the
role of
heart.
memory comes in.
This is what Cicero was talking about. When you drop that, Cicero was talking about how like this art of memory was important for the shaping of the soul. What he was
Yeah.
really getting at is this idea that it's not just being able to remember, it's not memory itself that matters. Like, oh, I can recite all of pi up until like the 1,000th letter, right? That's not going to improve your soul. What you take in, St. Paul talks about this, is like when he says focus on the good, focus on whatever is, I don't have that verse memorized, but he gives like 14 different like, descriptors, whatever is true, whatever is beautiful, whatever is, uplifting, right?
Yeah.
Focus on these things. That's inherently related to memory. It's inherently related to them imprinting on you. And you think of
Mhm.
that language of to be imprinted upon, right?
Yeah.
It means that something's been stamped into you. You've been shaped by it. And the stories we tell are basically just large scale mnemonics, right? Did I say that word right?
Yep.
Mnemonic.
Yeah.
The M is silent, right? You just say mnemonic. Is that how you
You
say it?
got it. Yeah.
All right.
Mnemonic. That's
They're basically just large scale mnemonics for the broad categories of life that need to shape us. Um, and the myths and legends that cultures have transmuted through their ages are their memories. They're memories of very, very valuable information that are intended to shape you in the correct way. And that's not the same thing as journalism.
no.
That's not the same thing as reporting the facts or writing down a crime scene report, right?
Mhm.
It's performing a fundamentally different function than just the mere transmission of trivia.
Which kind of goes into when we talk about the bigger picture of something, that's where the concept of wisdom comes in, or the distinction between knowledge and wisdom, which is, if you want to just oversimplify the definition, but like knowledge is like knowing all the stuff, but then wisdom is knowing how it all fits together. And so
Mm,
where memory comes in is, like you said, it's not just the minutia. It's, okay, I have to know the minutia so that I can see how it all fits together, right? Or I need to know enough of the details to know how they all fit together to give meaning to it. And this actually, we've kind of circled around this idea too. And I'm going to mention Plato again. It was actually Socrates, but where he talks about education itself just being a remembering of what was already there. Now, one can argue that that's not like the best definition of, or the best understanding of how education works, but it's indicative of, this is the culture that he was coming from, that he and Plato
hmm
were steeped in, is this idea of remembering something that preceded you, and that you're just drawing from what was already there, right? Whether it's the ancients or a previous generation or whatever. And that's the role that memory has, is that it preserved, and not just these stories, but like I said, it's all the details that fit into the bigger story. And really, this is the Iliad, this is the Odyssey, this is the Aeneid from the Latin perspective. But like, those
hmm
stories were told in a way that you could remember them better, right? And that's where
Right.
this art of memory kind of comes in too. But yeah, go. What were you gonna say?
Well, and so much of like Hebrew literature has a lot of like basically like its poetry is like repetitious and things like that.
Yep.
But then again, I think this is actually probably true of a lot of ancient languages as well, because it was so focused on being able, like there was a relationship between the people that used the language and heard the stories and the tool of language itself, right? I think that we've lost that in our modern society. We think that it doesn't matter. It's super utilitarian. Our use of language has become, and I say this, I'm in marketing, right? Like this is all kind of deeply personal to me because I see this in my industry and I know the spirit that drives my industry. And it is all about, all right, I'm going to try to walk the line between not getting in trouble with
Yeah.
my employers and just laying out like a warning sign or like a red flag here. But like language has become just lowest common denominator because you need it to be appreciable by anyone who reads it, right? So there's no efforts to engage with language. Language, if anything, is the barrier that has to be subdued in order to convey the idea as quickly as possible. And so language is actually something of a barrier. And so what you see, and you see this in how we communicate as such, because like nowadays we use messaging so frequently, we no longer even use words, right? Now it's
Yeah.
like NM instead of never mind.
Oh, I thought you
Or
were gonna
laugh
say
out loud. I use
I know, like an emoji, because that's a picture. Which
or yeah,
I've
or
heard,
now it's just pictograms.
I've
We've
heard-
actually we've gone back to
I've
cave
heard
drawings,
those things
basically.
say 1,000 words. So are we just using more words? Distilled
well,
into one.
the answer is no, we are not. We are absolutely we are getting rid of language because it's a barrier to the immediate comprehension of whatever we immediately need someone to understand, and there's no poetry in it anymore. If you treat language like you're not in a relationship with it, it's just some kind of
just a tool
thing to get out of the way, right?
Yeah.
Your whole society suffers, and this has a direct impact on memory because it's language that we use to communicate, and it's language that we use to remember things.
So
at least societally, anyway.
So we've both been very kind of abstract for like the first half. So if anybody's still with us, I want to get a little bit into some specific examples, some specific stories, whether it's from pop culture or from like ancient pop culture. Can you think of like any movies or TV shows that really incorporated this memory, like technique or memory well?
Well,
yeah.
I mean, the first thing that pops to my mind is Memento.
Okay. Yeah.
Memento is a real trippy movie about a dude who has a brain a damage that causes him to lose short-term memory. And so he wakes up every 5 minutes, basically. It's been a long time since I've actually seen the movie.
Well,
but like he wakes up periodically from like where he's at and he can't remember what just happened.
And that's
so
how the
he,
movie's structured. And it was a very like the way that like
the movie plays
really
backwards in
like
time,
this.
basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was a early Christopher Nolan movie, and Christopher Nolan is super thematic in all of his work, and a lot of it is about time and perception and memory. Pretty much like all of it is.
Yeah.
So Memento is one of his early movies, and it plays backwards because basically the whole movie is you as an audience figuring out how to remember what he cannot. And it actually has a tragic edge to it. He's trying to solve his wife's murder, by the way. So the driving thrust of the movie is him trying to figure out the cause of this injustice that's occurred to him, even though he doesn't have the memorial tools necessary to work well. And we as an audience follow him as he continues, but there's tragedy to it because we discover things that he immediately forgets.
Yeah.
And it's a great movie. I mean, go check it out, folks.
And it actually highlights one of the things you were just talking about, how imperfect when you and again, not that it was his fault. I mean, it was tragic that it happened to him, but when you don't have that memory, and you have to replace it with these sort of like ersatz. Like he gets the tattoos on himself with very short phrases, which you're always like, what does that
Yeah.
phrase mean? What does that phrase mean? Or he has to
Yeah,
take
he
these
has to remember
Polaroids,
what the phrases mean.
and
It's like,
and
yeah,
he
what
has
is
to take the Polaroids and write a brief message on the Polaroid. And so it's showing how inadequate the replacements for memory can be, and how that inadequate replacement can, like you said, lead to a tragic sort of conclusion without giving too much of a spoiler.
Well,
or
it
whatever.
becomes a dead letter, right? It's a dead,
Yeah.
like, all right, so you can write something down, but if it doesn't mean anything to you, if you don't have a personal relationship with like the story that letter is trying to tell you, then it's just jargon, right?
Yeah.
And so, um,
Or like
this
the photo,
applies to our
like he had those Polaroids that had no context to him, and so it wasn't as helpful to
Right.
him. And yeah, like you said, you're the viewer screaming at the TV, like, you know, because you have the context, you have the, you know, the
Right.
wisdom, so to speak. So
yeah, the long-term relationship with it. And just like the character in Memento, and what you were trying to get at here, Mike, is if you as a culture don't have longevity of view, because no one lives long enough. No one lives 200 years, right? No one lives long enough to see what the wisdom of whatever the 19th century was. It's easy for us to criticize the problems of the 19th century. We can point out all the things that don't jive with our current space and time, right? But it's much harder for us to understand the wisdom of the past. And if we're not even trying to, because we don't have a personal relationship with the past, then forget about it. Forget about it.
Yeah.
You're not going to, it will mean nothing to you, and you will learn nothing, and you are constantly having to reinvent yourself. And that's a very stressful way. It's a very stressful way for a culture to live.
Well, no, just again, like you said, if Guy Pearce, the main character in Memento, is representative of an entire civilization, look at him. Look at him in that story. I mean, even when he feels like he's doing the right thing or doing the noble thing, he's anxious the entire time. He can't have a real relationship, and you know, as we've already alluded to, without giving spoilers, it ends in tragedy too. And so it's tragic.
And honestly,
at the end.
I like how you bring up even when he thinks he's doing the right thing. Because there's tons of times in that movie where he thinks he's doing the right thing because in the snapshot of his view, of his perspective, the only context he has implies that the right thing is to like help this person, right? But little does he know that the person he's trying to help is actually his enemy. But he just doesn't know because the enemy is able to present in a way that looks like they need help, right? And he's just being a good guy. And he's just trying to do the right thing.
Yeah.
But he's actually being used. And as a culture, if you don't have long-term cultural memory, and if you don't continue to transmit the wisdom that has been so hard fought across ages, you can try to be doing the right thing. You can try to be doing what just seems good to you, but you don't have the context, and you end up doing truly deplorable things, right?
Yeah, no,
I think that's what we do.
And it's the first example because, like you said, it was kind of the movie that put Christopher Nolan on the map. But you can find this sort of theme of, and like you've kind of mentioned, it's sort of a critique of modernity in general and how, because it's lost that sense of memory, how directionless and how anxious it kind of is. Even though he doesn't really give so much of a solution to it, but it at least presents the problem in a very compelling way.
And it's funny, honestly, he made that, I'm going to guess like 2002.
99.
In other words, this is before cell phones.
99.
Oh, 99.
Yeah.
Wow, 99. That was a really good year for movies. But
American Beauty too, right?
Oh, so many. The Matrix.
Oh yeah.
I'm telling you, 99 is one of those epochal years in movies. There's a ton of good movies in 99.
I've heard the 90s
anyway.
in general, but anyway, keep going.
I was there. But
Forrest
99
Gump,
is good.
Shawshank Redemption. Yeah, I don't know.
Oh yeah, every decade has good movies, but
Just
aggregated, yeah.
you
Oh,
can't
you know what? They
remember
were
all of
great,
them.
Mike. There's so many I can't remember them. But
Sorry,
if
it
only
was
I had,
2000. I thought it was 99.
see,
My memory failed me.
technically you were closer. Yeah, it did. But he wasn't, honestly, his movie becomes prophetic for our culture. I don't think that. I think that he, maybe he was. I haven't watched a whole lot of behind the scenes stuff on this film. Maybe he was making an intentional commentary on our inability to remember. Right? He might have been, but man, did he not? Little did he know, right? Like, if he thought it was bad in 2000, look at us in 20 years later, right? I mean, like, we are way with the phone, the iPhone, the smartphone has obliterated our ability to remember things or to engage with literature or to do anything.
Yeah.
Text
Well,
messaging.
and we're not going to be able to get into this so much, but you're kind of drawing on the connection between memory and attention, right? Which that is part of, going back to Dr. Vost's and St. Thomas Aquinas's and this art of memory, this loci method, which is very much about attention. You have to like put yourself in the story. You have to create a story that you as the character, you're walking through these different rooms of the house of memory. And to the degree that you are attentive to each of those locations, that's how it actually works. That's how you remember whatever details you have to remember, whether it's, I mean, it could literally be used for anything. I'll use it in my classroom for the different vocab words that my students have to learn for each test that I give them throughout the semester. And so each location is dedicated to whatever vocab word, which is correspondent to something, whether it's an idea or an event. And they have to be attentive to, okay, when I'm here, I see this. When I'm here, I see this. And the idea is that you are looking at yourself and the information in the context of a story. And that's what makes, like I said, that going back to the original use of this method or how it's been applied, that's what makes it effective, is the attention and the sense of context that now you are in a story. You're the character walking through this house. Or actually, I was going to refer to did you ever watch the Benedict Cumberbatch Sherlock show?
Yeah, I did.
BBC?
I haven't seen all of it.
So
I've seen
one of the actual episodes is dedicated to he's like the bad guy, and he creates a memory palace, and he will dig up dirt on people, on like famous figures, and he'll use it against them, right, to blackmail them or whatever. And everybody's like, where's the hard drive? Where's he keeping all this information? How does he know all this? And the big reveal is that he's actually been keeping it in his mind the entire time, in his memory palace, and that he's able to, extract all of these details about this bad thing that this person did or whatever, controversial thing, and then use it against them. And so Sherlock kind of has to because again, Sherlock's big thing is he can pick up details or remember details and use them to his advantage. And so it's very much a battling of the minds between these two.
I mean, people listening to this should go ahead and look up any number of conversations that Dr. Vost has about this, because he'll go into much greater detail about how these memory palaces work. But it's a fascinating and simple concept to understand that's super effective.
Yeah. It's super effective. Sounded like a video game.
Super effective. I'm in marketing. All right, how about other pop culture references? Like the other one that I'm going to drop is Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless
Mind. I was waiting
Mind.
for that because we've talked about that before.
Yeah, it came up in our conversation with Dr. Vost.
Yeah, so the Jim Carrey, Scarlett.
Yeah.
No, is it Scarlett Johansson?
No, it's not Scarlett Johansson.
Kate Winslet. Kate Winslet.
Kate Winslet. Yeah.
Jim Carrey.
This is another trippy movie about. It's in the near future, but it's technically a science fiction flick, and they have this way of erasing memories in the future, and so people will go and take this service where if they have particularly traumatic events in their life or sad memories that are debilitating them, they will use this service to erase those memories so they can go back to like functioning well and things like that. And Jim Carrey has this really bad breakup, and he wants to erase the memory of this girl. And then halfway through the process, he realizes how valuable those memories are to him. And the rest of the film is him trying to, in his mind, he's a character in his mind trying to save the memories of his relationship as they are kind of dissolving before his eyes. It's doesn't do it justice. The description I gave doesn't do justice to just how weird and trippy this movie is. But it's all about being in Jim Carrey's head. So if
Well-
that tells you anything.
That's like every movie of Jim Carrey. Is like being inside of his head. It's just a different it's a different compartment in the memory, the house of memory. No,
Right.
what it speaks to though, actually, what I was kind of picking up as you were describing it. I mean, we've both seen it before too, but it's the connection between memory and identity, right? And really
Yep.
to not just to Christians, even to any ancient person who understands the soul was the thing that gave you your identity. And part of that capacity or function of the soul was memory. And so he was who he was because of those. And he was scared of, who am I going to be if I lose that, right? If this memory goes away, if every memory of every connection to this relationship goes away, well, who am I going to be when it's all said and done? Right? How do we can't compartmentalize the mind as much as, and I realize it's a science fiction movie, but we can't compartmentalize the mind. And so, the memory thing is, it's not just about knowing the stuff, it's knowing how they all fit together. And you aren't
It's having a personal relationship with your past.
Okay.
It's having a living life, right? You are not just trivia. Your history is not just moments that happened in the past that are unrelated to who you are now. We have to be careful, I think, because you hear too many modern people, really of any stripe, who go on to say, like, I don't have regrets. Without my past, I wouldn't be who I am. How can I regret these decisions when these decisions are what make me who I am now? And it's like, so what I want to differentiate here is, on the one hand, everything is for our good, and everything can be used in our repentance, in our transformation, in our deification, right? But that is not necessarily justification for making those bad decisions in the moments.
Yeah.
And regret is a great part of our repentance, right? Guilt is necessary for us to repent, but you need the memory of the bad thing you did in order to feel the guilt to begin with.
Yeah.
So, it's not an excuse, because I hear that too often. I hear too many people be like, they use it as a way to dismiss, the things that they've done in the past instead of owning the things.
Well, no,
they've done
that's
in
the
the
thing,
past.
is like, it can be misused as an unwillingness to learn from mistakes. Well, the only way you learn from mistakes is by remembering them, but also remembering how bad you felt or how it hurt others or whatever the case is. So it's absolutely, it has that kind of purgative, but also that illuminative and unitive effect on the soul. And that's just a very kind of passing reference to the 3 stages of the spiritual life, which you'll see in
I'll give you a good
ancient Christian spiritual theology.
Here's a good example. Star Trek 4. Star Trek 5.
Okay.
The Undiscovered Country. In that one, that's the one where Spock's brother Cybok shows up, and they're going to go find God in outer space.
Okay.
Because God needs a starship. And the famous, what does God need with a starship? But watch the movie, it's great. No, but in that, what Cybok does, if anyone knows anything about Star Trek, Spock is super rational calculator incarnate, and Vulcans minimize emotion, right? Cybok is a Vulcan who, he's like a Vulcan heretic. It's a very religiously themed movie. But he's a Vulcan heretic who leans into emotion, and he has this way of bringing people to grips with their emotional traumas. And so he basically spends the movie developing a cult around himself as a prophet, by giving people emotional release from all these traumas, and they relive the memory of these traumas, and then it dissolves, and then it gets removed from them, kind of thing.
Sounds
and he
like
tries
kind of
to
like
do
a
it to Kirk.
hypnotherapy, like a
It is.
metaphor.
Yeah, it's
for
very much like
hypnotherapy.
that. He tries to do it to Kirk, and Kirk's like the last man standing because everyone else on his crew has fallen under the sway of the emotional release of this guy. But Kirk, he has this big, scenery chewing moment where he's like, I need my pain. I need my memories, and he's talking about the importance of memory. He's talking about he is giving voice to this thing where it's like, I don't want to get rid of like the trauma that I have,
Yeah.
because the trauma that I have is what makes me who I am. But he is actually kind of doing it in a way that I was just warning against, because you get this sense that Kirk doesn't have regrets about like his life, but Kirk is not exactly a saint, so we gotta be careful as Christians about it.
Well,
But there's value.
it's almost supposed to be like he's kind of like the personification of magnanimity, where it's like he has to like be so, behind his kind of decisions because he's the leader, right? And so nobody can see him as weak or whatever. And so it's fitting with his character, like you said, even though it's not necessarily what we would aspire to. And we've already kind of done a little bit of the distinction between like, well, you can be grateful that you've learned from them, but not grateful for the pain they've caused, right? If we're talking about our sins.
Yeah.
And
Or use it as an excuse to
keep sinning,
lack
right?
repentance.
Yeah.
Yeah, to keep,
To say, oh, well,
or to
I
just not address it, to just not
God
address it.
just wants me to learn more, so I better keep sinning, right? Is that
just move on. Don't relive the past, right? I'm just going to move on. I'm just going to move on. Not the right attitude.
Yeah, so I mean, it's one of those where, yeah, like it's not necessarily encouraging you to wallow, but that would be just like you can distort memory by neglecting it. Well, you can distort memory by overindulging it. And so it's not about the neglect or indulgence of memory itself, because even that, it's not like an unbridled good. That has to be tempered like everything else, right? Go back to our, moderate golden way of Aristotle, golden mean of Aristotle.
Well, if you get into, and Dr. Vost, he was a therapist, right, by trade, and so all of his relationship with memory is rooted in therapy. It's therapeutic use, and any psychoanalyst will tell you that we need to address our memories and come to grips with them in a way that is helpful to us and not hurtful to us. But we can't ignore them, right? We can't repress them. And what's interesting about how memory works, and what's so hopeful about it, and what's valuable about it, but we should understand how it works, is every time you remember something, you're making a new copy of it. Yeah, it's like you use a photocopier, and if you keep photocopying the same, like the photocopy of the photocopy of the photocopy,
yeah,
it gets diminished, right? It changes. So that's one of the things about our personal memories that we need to understand, is that we're always recreating the past when we remember things. But what you can do as a Christian is address the trauma of the past by looking at it from God's perspective. And then when you recreate that memory, as you bring it to your minds, you're adding God to it. You're adding Christ to it in the context of his life and his, providence and his relationship with you in that moment, to go back to the cheesy sand, footprints on the beach story, right? I mean, for what it's worth, like all these things I remember, Lord, and where were you? I felt so alone, kind of thing. He's like, but that was the time I was carrying you. I think that goes back to Plato. But
probably. Oh my gosh, can you imagine giving the footprint story to Plato? It's like,
yeah. No, but like what you've done is you've recontextualized that memory now,
and
in the light of God, in the light of salvation,
not a dismissal of the evil, or not a dismissal of the pain, and it's not a forgetting of it. Like you said, it's looking back on it. It requires the memory.
Okay.
So the other thing too, we've been talking about a lot of modern or current examples, but this connection to memory, it always has these ancient origins, and not just ancient in terms of, we've mentioned Cicero and how it goes back into the technical or utilitarian aspect of it, but that it has this mythological origin. And so I wanted to get into the goddess of memory. So there is a goddess of memory, and the significant, believe it or not, the Greeks had a god, a goddess for everything. It's kind of like Catholic and Orthodox with the saints.
They remembered to include
fittingly
a goddess to memory.
Which I
Fittingly,
kind of
yes.
said it offhandedly and jokingly, but it is kind of like the communion of saints, right? It is sort of the same role as the pantheon, where yeah, there's a saint for everything, and there's a god or goddess for everything. For better or worse, that it's a analog.
No, there's a lot of
Sure.
continuity there. I mean, I think that's a human thing to do. And it's. Do you ever worry? I mean, it's a little bit of a tangent, but would you ever worry? Like, let's just say, for the sake of argument, however unlikely it is that Mike S is going to become a
Yeah,
saint,
yeah.
folks. Are you worried about being pigeonholed into being like the patron saint of like sandwiches or something like that? Like, because you don't necessarily
Yeah,
get
no, it's
to
very much
choose what people
yeah,
pray to
it's
you
very
about,
much
And so I wonder how many how
what
many
would worry
saints
me
are out
about
there
that is
who are
because so
like,
many saints are the patron of either something they struggled with or the thing that killed them. I'd be like, okay, so what happened with the sandwich that made me the patron saint of it? Because we've talked about this before, but like, the patron saint of
well,
the patron saint of grillers or barbecuers is Saint Lawrence because he was martyred by being grilled, uh, killed on a grill,
of
and
course,
the
of
patron
course.
saint, I
That's a
think
very ironic. That's a very
Saint.
ironic sainthood. Let no one say that the Catholic Church
Yeah,
doesn't have a sense of
exactly.
humor, I guess.
And Saint Simon the Apostle, Simon the Zealot, not Simon Peter. Um, he's the one he's sculpted. The sculpture of him is that he's holding his own skin because he was skinned alive. But he's also the patron saint of
Wow.
tanners and people who work with animal hides, or work with skins. So again, another kind of ironic twist with that one.
If we ever do an episode on the Saw films, we'll just tether it to like early Roman martyrology.
That's it's a
Martyrology? Ever
retelling
to
of
say that?
the
It's a
yeah.
bloodbath.
Well, no,
It's yikes.
okay. So this kind of is just to continue the tangent. I know I've mentioned Dante numerous times in various aspects. So this gets into the concept
Mhm.
of the contrapasso, which Dante integrates into his, especially Inferno and Purgatorio, and it's supposed to highlight, just like making the saint the patron of whatever thing killed them, or the way that he or she was martyred. It's showing the victory over death, right, through the death itself. It's just another sort of, it kind of goes back to our
Mhm.
trickster
Yeah.
episode where it's conquering death by death.
Yeah,
And
it's
so
like
it's
an
the church's
inversion
way
thing.
of, I would,
Mhm.
if I'm going to be really edgy, I'm going to say it's the church's way of giving their middle finger to the devil or to death by saying, yeah,
Trolling
yeah,
trolling the
exactly.
demons.
So, but anyway, going back into the goddess of memory, see what happens is I mentioned one thing. Yeah. So the goddess of memory is Mnemosyne.
Good conversation,
And
man.
not only is Mnemosyne the goddess of memory, but with Zeus, she is the mother of the muses. And so if you think of the muses
Hmm.
having this essential role to the poets, to the artists, to basically to culture makers, you have the
Mhm.
goddess of memory who kind of plays that maternal figure to all of them, right? The poets always invoke the muses, or the artist always invoke the muses, and the muses wouldn't be here if it weren't for memory. And so it's again,
That's an
is
awesome
it?
correlation. I actually super dig that. I might have known that at one point, but I totally had forgotten it,
Yeah,
ironically. And this idea that the mother of art is
yeah,
memory, it
and
just
culture.
speaks so
Yeah,
well to yeah, yeah, yeah. Art and culture is memory, and it's just everything we've been talking about in this episode just personified. Um, it's almost like these ancient people who created these myths
they got a
had
couple of
a
things right.
logic
They got a
to
couple of
what they
things
were
right.
doing. They got
A
a few things
logos.
right.
The Greeks had a
It'll
logos, you could say. Yeah.
uh-huh. You might
There was
say,
another
you might
example though
say.
from I know you're partial to Norse. I mean, we're both partial to Norse mythology, but there's memory in Norse mythology too that you wanted to talk about.
Oh, right, yeah, the ravens. Yeah, yep. The Odin's ravens are interesting enough. I forget their names. They do have names.
Edgar
It's
Allan
like,
Poe.
you
That's the
know
name. That was his
yeah,
name.
that's
Yeah.
right. Nevermore. One was Lenore and the other was Nevermore.
And
But
is Annabeth another?
I
No,
can't
that's
remember their
I might
names.
be thinking of something else. Yeah,
Oh, no, yeah, I know what you're talking about. Anyway, don't
I
get
know.
me
Sorry. Yeah.
distracted. No, but you have, and their names are actually just like the Norse language for memory and thought, and so I just can't remember what those Norse words are. but his ravens would go and like fly around the world and bring him memory
Well,
and thought, right? And so there's something interesting about how that relates to Odin and how it would kind of
well, if
correlate
you
with
think
what's
of Odin
happening
as the
with
Allfather
uh
and the kind of
go on.
symbol for wisdom, like he's the wisdom figure too. And so having
He
his
is
like
the
pet
wisdom figure.
ravens, if you want me to be glib about it, like that, it definitely makes sense that he would have something to do with memory too.
No, absolutely. Well, I mean, so much of basically, we'll just say consciousness, right, is tethered to Odin within. It seems to me anyway that a lot of the Norse gods are, like Thor's like the strong one, right? Loki's the mischievous one. They're a little bit more one note, whereas Odin, and honestly, even across like many pantheons, Odin might be one of the most interesting
Mm.
figures because he is so much more elastic than a lot of other gods are. Don't get me wrong, a lot of in the Greek culture, their gods, they actually did have a lot of kind of like, elasticity too kind of thing. You have this idea that Diana is the goddess of virgins and motherhood
Oh,
and
yeah.
hunting, like yeah, it's like hunting, motherhood, and virginity. We all prayers being directed at the
Mm.
same person. You know, um, and then there's other stuff too. I'm sure. So like, it's true that there's elasticity, but Odin kind of takes the cake. But I guess for the purposes of this conversation, yeah, he's definitely. It's one of his really iconic realities, though, is
Yeah.
these ravens that go out there and like bring him knowledge and wisdom. And if you are personifying your culture in a figure like that, um, it makes sense that central to that figure's
Mhm.
tools, right, would be things related to
Yeah,
memory
that
and
it's like
thought.
it's essential. And
So
like you said, Odin is always kind of pictured with, yeah, like the raven in some capacity.
part of what I was ranting about earlier in this conversation is just how much language
Mm.
matters to memory, just how much language matters to culture, right? I think that we're so close to language that we ignore it. We don't realize kind of like what a pivotal role it plays in our like reality as such. And if you start talking about memory, my mind almost automatically starts talking
Mm.
about language. It's almost like they're synonymous with each other. If you associate thoughts with language, which there's pros and cons to that, but in a lot of ways, most of what we consider thought is us kind of thinking language, like
Mhm.
thinking words to ourselves, right? If you consider thought to be just a synonym for language, then when you look at Odin's ravens as thought and memory, it's almost like you're saying like language
Mm.
and memory, right? Um, so they're very tethered to each other. Frankly, one of the other big things about Odin is that he learned to read runes. He
So
learned to
there's that
read,
kind of techne part, right? Because
right?
it's
Like
the
he
writing it
he
down and
hung
the
on.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's all like we could probably have at some point we'll have a conversation about Odin, right? And when we do that, there'll probably be a lot of thematic similarities to this conversation because
Maybe
there's
we'll
so much
do
there.
it'll be a
But
crossover of the Netflix series Wednesday, and then we'll also talk about Odin. That's the clever crossover that nobody's thought to do yet.
ah, I'm on the
I
fence
haven't
about
seen it, to be
Wednesday,
honest.
the
I was
TV show.
just
Yeah,
trying to be funny.
I watched the first episode
Um,
of it.
so
Trying, keep trying.
so
Um,
so
Hey, no, but hey, let's not. I wanted to finish really quickly that the Tower of Babel, like what gets undone at Babel gets healed at Pentecost, right? And so I didn't want to leave on a note that conversation with the idea that Christianity is anti-culture, right? Because the implication of what I was saying is that the Tower of Babel represents like human culture for nefarious ends, but nevertheless human culture, and that God intervenes and kind of like
oh
destroys
yeah.
that culture,
No,
right?
that
Destroys
there's
the
a lot
ability to create
more
culture.
to the
He
Babel
doesn't leave it
story
there though.
than, yeah,
Christ
a 30
comes
second
and
unpacking.
yeah, and he comes and heals all that. And so now you at Pentecost you have the idea that there's going to
It's
be
the
a new
reintegration
covenant, a new
from the yeah.
culture, yeah, a reintegration and a new empire not of
Yeah.
this world, right? Because it's a kingdom not of this world. So, Christians now this politically gets kind of messy throughout human
Yeah.
history, right? because you start to get into imperial games with Christian emperors and things like that, and I mean that's a long conversation, but
R.I.P. Charlemagne.
nevertheless,
Is that what you're
we're
kind
pro
of
empire.
leading to?
I can't help but love Charlemagne. He's too cool of a historical figure, even though he really hated the Greeks. I have a lot of bones to pick with Charlemagne's decisions, but
I know I shouldn't
he
have
made a
brought
lot
that
of
up
good
in the
ones too.
last little section. So no, I think this definitely deserves a continued conversation. Jacob, you wanted to talk more about some other examples. I hear that you have an entire 60-minute Total Recall where it's just you talking about it the whole time. So maybe we'll have that be our next one. But we definitely got into a lot of the.
At some point we'll talk Total
foundation, and
Recall.
yeah, I just want to thank you for coming on and participating in this good conversation about memory. And like I said, the main motivation of us doing this too was just to remember our first guest and a guy who contributed so much to not just memory, but to just the building up of the church and the faith, and was a servant of the church, servant of God. I mean, in the best way possible, the best way that he could live too. And
All-around
in Dr.
stand-up
Kevin
guy.
Vost. And so that was, again, going back kind of full circle to the first part of this episode.
And this is very fitting. In the Orthodox tradition, what we say when we're remembering the dead, the departed, is memory eternal. And so how appropriate, memory eternal, Dr. Vost. May you always be remembered.
Thanks for listening to Voyage Podcast. The Voyage Podcast is a production of Voyage Comics and Publishing, which seeks to create exceptional entertainment informed by Catholic values that inspire people to live a heroic life. Voyage Comics seeks to advance truth and beauty found in powerful stories. To learn more, visit voyagecomics.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram